Mai kai. Ano ai me ke aloha ia kākou, pākahi a pau. Welcome everybody again to our OHA Trustee Forum. This is your third episode in a series of 3. If you caught us 2 weeks ago, we had a talk story session with the candidates running for the Molokaʻi and Lanai OHA Trustee seat, as well as the candidates running for the Kauai and Niʻihau seat. Last week, we got to talk stories with those candidates running for the Hawaii Island OHA Trustee seat. And this week, we will be talking stories with the OHA Trustees running for the At-Large seat. So if you got to talk stories or catch us online last 2 weeks, our format is pretty simple. We usually start off with a guest who's going to talk stories with us for 5 minutes, and then we move on to the nitty-gritty of our forum. We'll ask our candidates to answer a series of questions. They will have 2 minutes to answer each question, and you guys won't be able to see this, but I will be holding and keeping time for them. And if they keep within their 2 minutes, they're good to go. If they talk longer than the 2 minutes, our lovely friends here at OEV TV will be muting them, and we'll be moving on just to give everyone a fair shot and answer within the 2-minute mark. Now, today we have a very special guest. This wahine mana, she's a Miss Aloha Hula 2010. Mahealani Mika Hirao Solom. Aloha e ku'uwahi tita maka maka. How you doing?
Aloha, aloha nui kako. I am Maikai. I'm so honored to be here tonight, actually. So mahalo nui for having me.
I was so excited when I found out that you were going to be joining us this week. Why don't we just start off with ho'olauna? Why don't you share with everybody who you are, where you're from, what you do, stuff like that.
Sure. O wau o Mahealani Mika, mai ka mokupuni o Oahu. I am very, very proud to be from the island of Oahu, born and raised specifically from Kapala Mauka. I have been dancing hula from the age of 5 years old. I grew up in hula, and hula really helped to shape who I am and helped to shape my view of the world, really, and my view of myself as well as my community, my ohana, basically everything with that term hula is life, right? I attended the Kamehameha schools, and through being at Kamehameha, I was also able to learn from multiple kumuhula, and I also got to travel the world extensively, as I still do today, after competitively being a part of hula for Mary Monarch and winning the title of Miss Aloha Hula. And that has given me the opportunity to really form a connection and a connectivity. Hula is really my way, my lens that I see the world, and that I'm able to connect with others, not just throughout Hawaii, but all over internationally, as well as on the continental US. And so that's a little bit about me. So I'm just really happy to be here today.
Awesome. Let's start you off with a $1 million question. Why is voting important?
$1 million question. Why is voting important? Voting is extremely important. Of course, as we're all taught from going to school and everything, voting is our right. It's a privilege. It's our kuleana, really. I remember voting, I also think, is a process that everybody naturally has to go through, the importance of what that means to us as individuals. Even though we're told that it's so important, sometimes we don't realize that our voice matters and our voice counts, and there's a process that happens there. I definitely remember being 18 years old and like, hey, I'm gonna vote. And I was so gung-ho about it. I remember walking into the voting booth and looking at the ballot and only recognizing a couple names. I didn't even realize so many voting means you have to actually go in there as an educated voter. And I think a lot of us in our very young age are very gung-ho and passionate about that, but we don't realize that we do have to do our own homework and be an educated voter. I remember being a little standoffish after that because I felt a little overwhelmed. And in full transparency, I went through a period where I was kind of thinking it's all or nothing, 100 or 0. So my vote doesn't matter. My vote doesn't count. It's not going to make a difference. And I didn't vote a couple of times, and that's in full transparency to everybody. I think some people can relate to that. And so I'm here on the other side of it now saying, no, it does matter. And I wish I had voted those times that I was intimidated by it. And now that I'm in my early 30s, I realize how much of our lives on a day-to-day basis, the systems that are created or policies that are made, especially as Native Hawaiians, directly impacts us. And so our voice is important, especially at a local level, and especially at our Hawaii state level. So voting is extremely important to be able to not just be passionate, as we know we all are here, or holding signs, or being up at the Mauna, or dancing hula. We have to take that passion to the polls also. So that is why I feel voting is important.
You know, in Hawaii, it's really important for us to also vote and be cognitive of our vote when it comes to these OHA trustees. Why is that so important for us to be cognizant of these OHA elections?
I think it's great for us. And of course, for OHA, you know, it's not just Native Hawaiians who can vote for OHA. All registered voters in Hawaii, Hawaiian by lineage or not, vote for our OHA candidates and trustees. And for me, I really realized that just like hula is a safe space, that is something that is very Hawaiian, but not only Hawaiian people take part in hula and are able to thrive because of feeling and caring about hula, which is something very Hawaiian. So people who love hula put into hula and worry about the well-being of hula, and in turn are able to be positively impacted in all of our lives through it. And that's the same because everything Hawaiian is the same. It's Hawaiian, right? So for OHA, everybody should care about voting for OHA, because empowerment, to me, empowerment of Native Hawaiians and the overall well-being of Native Hawaiians is the empowerment and well-being of all of Hawaii.
All right, so we have about 20 seconds left to talk stories. You have one message to send out to the young people to inspire them to vote. What would that be?
Your voice does matter, okay? And it's the easiest this year. You don't even have to go no place. You can just stay home and vote. That's how we're all voting this year. So hashtag vote. It takes just about as long as making like a really good Instagram post, so you get them, okay? Trust me, it impacts all of us, and your voice does matter.
All right. Well, mahalo nui for being here with us. Mahalo for your mana'o and mahalo for your inspiration. Everybody heard that your voice matters. Hashtag go out, go vote. All right. Mahalo nui e mahelani Mika. We are now going to go into our forum. We're going to start off with our opening statements for all of our candidates. Earlier this evening, we drew lucky numbers and drew names. And so we have the order in which we are going. And Jackie is going to start us off. Jackie, you have a minute on the clock for your opening statement. Go ahead and unmute yourself. And when you are ready, you may begin your opening remarks.
Ano ai o Jackie ka o Keliʻi Burke ia. Komo mai into my art studio that I share with Papa and Mauna Kea. I'm a 1970 graduate from Kamehameha Schools. I hold a master's in public health and urban and regional planning from UH Manoa. I worked at the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Division for the Department of Health and as a planner for the Super Ferry in the Engineering Department of the Harbors Division, Department of Transportation. I'm on the Kalihi Neighborhood Board. I'm on the First Unitarian Church of Honolulu Board, and I serve as the Social Justice Committee Chair. I have 2 daughters, my Hanai Mo'opuna granddaughter, a dog, 2 cats, and 2 more Mo'opunas. I come from a very broad background of Russian, Mongolian, Hiroshima Japanese, and my Shasta Indian grandmother. She was Shasta Hawaiian. We did get around. I'm Hawaiian national, and I'm not a Native person. I'm a national. Thank you. I'm not a Native American. I'm a national person. Thank you.
Next up, we have Kaipo. Kaipo, go ahead and unmute yourself. You have a minute on the clock, and the floor is yours.
I'm Keliʻi Akina. My name is Kaipo Ka'ehua ke kai Malinoa Kalani Hanakahi. I am a kama aina of Wai'anai Ma'ili and a proud planted taro of Hano Hano o He'eia. I'm a taro farmer. I'm an established recording artist, a Grammy-nominated songwriter, and I address issues in regards to Mauna Kea, Waimanalo, Kalailoa, and Kahuku. I'm a proud konohiki, a fifth-generation konohiki of 151.65 acres in Ke'anai, Maui. This has been in my family in the times of Ka'ahumanu, underneath the house of Kamehameha, and I look to serve the people full-time, bringing a new voice and to accomplish 20% in 2020. Hopefully I have your support. Me ke aloha pau'ole, ke aloha nui, ke aloha aina. Aloha.
Mahalo nui e Kaipo. Up next, we have Keoni. Keoni, go ahead and unmute yourself. The clock is reset to 1 minute and the floor is yours.
Aloha kākou. My name is Keoni Souza. I want to thank the Office of Hawaiian Affairs for providing me with the opportunity to speak to Hawaii's voters. For everyone watching at home, thank you so much for joining us and watching this evening. To the other candidates, I respect each and every one of you for wanting to serve the Hawaiian community. And I look forward to hearing from you this evening as well. I'm a proud graduate of the Kamehameha Schools class of 2002, Imua. In my day job, I'm a realtor with Coldwell Banker Pacific Properties. I'm also an entertainer with the Grammy-nominated group Nāhoa, and I also serve on the board of directors of the Hawaii Academy of Recording Arts. I'm a proud father of 3 keiki, Bentley, 9 years old, who attends Punahou School, my son Royce, who is 6 years old and attends St. Louis School, and my 1-year-old baby girl, Presley. I'm married to my beautiful wife, Mahina, and we reside out in Kapolei. I'm running for OHA Trustee to be the voice of the Native Hawaiian community. And also, OHA has a lot of great opportunities and qualities, but we need to be doing more to serve our beneficiaries. Together, let's build a better future for Hawaii. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui e Keoni. Up next, we have Keliʻi Akina. Keliʻi, go ahead and unmute yourself. You have 1 minute on the clock.
Aloha mai kākou e maho aloha aloha o Keliʻi Akina ko'u inoa. I'm humbled to be your OHA Trustee at large. I'm also a husband and the father of 4 grown children who, like myself, are graduates of Kamehameha. Mahalo to Kaipo and the OHA staff for coordinating tonight's program, and a special aloha to all my candidate fellows. I wish you the very best. When I was elected an OHA Trustee, I fulfilled my campaign promise to stand up and challenge the system. I fought hard to rid the agency of fraud, waste, and abuse. Despite opposition, I championed an historic independent audit. And in the midst of scandal where many trustees had abused their personal allowances, I refused to take any funds and return more than $44,000 to beneficiaries. I'm now running for a second term to complete the work of reforming OHA and ensure that all Hawaiians have housing, jobs, education, and health care. E hana kākou. Let's work together and get this done. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui e Trustee Akina. Up next, we have Larry. Larry, if you could please unmute yourself. You have 1 minute on the clock for your opening statement.
Aloha, I'm Larry Kawaauhau. I'm a retired Army Sergeant veteran, also a range safety technician on Pohakuloa. My family, Kawaauhaus, originated from South Kona, Hawaii. I have a degree in business management. I served side by side with other soldiers in Iraq on maneuver to protect and defend people of another country. I am proud to have done my duty, and I will do that for you. Let us be reminded OHA represents revenues from stolen lands is to benefit Native Hawaiians. Revenues to beneficiaries is just one of my goals. No Native Hawaiian should allow their place of worship exchanged for maha'ois. Akua is above all. No Native Hawaiian should be arrested to protect their place of worship from maha'ois. No kupunas should stand before a judge to prove their right to worship Akua. Allow me to be that voice for you at OHA. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui. And rounding us out in our opening statements, we have Shane. Shane, go ahead and unmute yourself. You have 1 minute on the clock.
Mahalo. Ano ai me ke aloha. Being a part of OHA's community engagement team for the past 8 years gave me direct insight and experiences as to how the agency works and the services it provides. Prior, I spent 15 amazing years in hotel management and was the governor's representative in West Hawaii. I was also appointed by the Hawaii County Mayor and chaired a policy review subcommittee for the Kona Community Development Plan Action Committee. I'm a proud leader of the Hawaii Island District Council for the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs and chairs the Benefits and Trust Committee that reviews topics such as ceded lands and public trust revenues. Raised in the South Kona fishing village, seasoned with administrative and community skills, I'm a candidate well suited for OHA Trustee at-Large position. Aloha mai kākou. My name is Shane Akoni Palacat-Nelsen. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui to all of our trustee candidates for their opening statements. Also, mahalo to our guest, Mahealani Mika Hiraosalam, for joining us at the beginning. We're going to take a quick break, and after about a minute, we will come back and start our round of questions. Mahalo nui. Stay with us.
Heard you have a new process of voting this year. I don't vote, bro. It's so easy. All you gotta do is register by July 9th, get a ballot in the mail, fill them out, send them back. No lines, no poll stations, just you and your kuleana.
The only kuleana I have is become the next big MMA fight.
You think that's kuleana?
Lima McFarland?
Whoa, it's our kuleana, our right and responsibility. Before you represent Hawaii in the cage, make sure you represent your people with your ballot.
COVID-19 has taught us what is really essential in our lives. Toilet paper? Yep, that's essential. An affordable place to live? That's essential. Steady jobs are essential. How do we get those things? By voting Pono leaders into office who stand up for what's important. This year, Hawaii will shift to an all mail-in voting process. Starting July 21st, registered voters should watch for their ballots in the mail. Vote. It's essential.
Ano ai me ke aloha. Welcome back, everybody. Before the break, our candidates gave us their 1-minute opening statements, and now we are going to get into the nitty-gritty of our forum by asking them their 2-minute questions. And the first question is this. In recent years, closures to the tourist traffic due to natural disasters and the COVID-19 pandemic has revealed Hawaii's economic overdependence on tourism and the negative impacts that tourism has on natural and cultural resources and the communities that rely upon them. How can OHA play a role in balancing the benefits of tourism and the negative impacts on natural and cultural resources and the communities who rely on these resources? First up, we have Kaipo. Kaipo, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. We have 2 minutes on the clock, and you may share your mana'o.
Hi, aloha. OHA can work with HTA to create sustainable ecotourism that does not damage the local environment. I have some programs in mind, such as celestial navigation, canoe building, lo'i tours, and participation in cultural ceremonies. These are things tourists are truly interested in because many of them understand that the best thing in Hawaii is not the kai, it's not the wai or aina, it's the kanaka. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui, Kaipo. Up next is Keoni. Keoni, can you please unmute yourself? You have 2 minutes on the clock. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Kaipo. You know, ultimately, as a state, we need to focus on diversifying our revenue stream to include other industries, such as the film industry. We need to work very hard on resolving the larger problem in order to address and alleviate byproducts of being over-reliant on tourism. However, tourism will always be a substantial revenue factor, and we have to find ways to resolve the negative impacts on natural and cultural resources, especially for the communities who rely on those resources. OHA can contribute to the balancing act of tourism and taking care of resources by, number one, implementing programs that make certain that we are educating tourists on how to care for our aina and ocean during the stay in the islands, likely through an airline informational video that OHA can sponsor, because education helps to resolve ignorance. And number two, sponsoring events such as beach cleanups and other community engagement events to malama our resources. These are just two simple but fruitful ideas that we can implement as an agency. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui, Keoni. Up next, we have Trustee Akina. Keliʻi, go ahead and unmute yourself. The clock is reset 2 minutes, and the floor is yours.
Mahalo. Tourism is always going to be with us. Look at the sky, the ocean, the mountains, the beautiful people, the host culture, and the many cultures that have made Hawaii their home. The world will always be a pathway to our islands. But tourism is also a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's a golden goose that lays golden eggs, and many kama'aina businesses and workers make their livelihood from it. On the other hand, tourism has created overdependence on one economic sector, and it's often resulted in cultural and environmental disrespect for the Aina. Since the coronavirus pandemic, we've seen how fragile our economy is with its overdependence on one sector. Most of the 250,000 individuals who filed for unemployment have had something to do with the tourist industry. That's why we all need to start now to diversify Hawaii's economy. OHA can play a major role in this in two ways. First, OHA must take a seat at the table of decision-making to ensure, one, that tourism is sustainable as it integrates the core values of Hawaii. Two, that tourism honors and celebrates the host culture and multiple cultures that have become here. Third, that tourism is environmentally sensitive and practices Malama Aina. Secondly, OHA must help Hawaiians as individuals and businesses and as a people to prosper. This means to own a larger share of the equity of tourism, to get the education and business opportunities to diversify Hawaii's economy, and to become global leaders in the 21st century sustainable industries such as agriculture, technology, manufacturing, and finance. The silver lining in the coronavirus crisis is that we can now hit the reset button and do tourism right as part of a diverse and culturally sensitive economy. I'm committed to helping OHA lead the way for the Hawaiian people and all people of Hawaii. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui, Keliʻi. Up next, we have Larry. Larry, go ahead and unmute yourself. 2 minutes is on the clock. You may share your mana'o.
Right. Prior to OHA inception in 1978, that's over 40 years ago, our island's economy depend on tourism revenues, and as visitors increase, hotels was built to accommodate them. Businesses grew, added to employment. All of this impacted the extra use of our water supply, constant activities, use of our ocean, increased traffic. Just these three alone gave our islands rest due to this COVID-19. Hawaii State Legislature, Hawaii Island counties, elected state and county officials failed to diversify our island's economy. To seek balance, OHA needs to be part of all decision-making at every level of government. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui, Larry. Up next, we have Shane. Shane, you may unmute yourself. We have 2 minutes on the clock for you, and you may begin when you're ready.
Thanks. Mahalo, Kaipo. The possible positive outcomes from these closures allow for the government and community the opportunity to revamp the economic structures so that it's less impactful on the culture and natural resources. We all know the state relies on tourism and as one of its major economic engines and is less reliant on other industries. So to balance out tourism, Native Hawaiians must be actively engaging in reshaping the economy. And I see OHA's role in bridging industry leaders, decision makers, and community to build capacity in other industries that are meaningful to the community so that it can become equal or surpass tourism. Having worked in that industry, I believe that tourism needs to be restructured and held accountable to its impacts on cultural and natural resources. One way is to reestablish its framework to have the construct and values that prioritizes and supports cultural and natural resources within the tourist industry and encourage businesses who hold these values to be an example to influence policy, business planning, and marketing strategies with business chambers, the legislature, and tourism authorities. Mahalo, Kaipo.
Mahalo nui is Shane. And closing us out on round one is Jackie. Jackie, we have 2 minutes on the clock for you. Go ahead and unmute yourself and you may begin.
Okay, well, I can agree with about tourists. I can agree about resetting the clock. But there's one industry that we don't remember. Before we used to have agriculture, tourists, and the military. We still have the military. They're a tremendous impact on our economy. And we haven't asked them to increase their input into our economy. They're not paying any lease rent for 11 bases, for Pohakuloa, for Kauai Harbor. That's a viable partner to increase their share and give the state more money or give more revenue to the ceded lands. In fact, when Barbers Point was taken, I don't know why the Hawaiians didn't get that. There was housing, there was infrastructure. Thailand is closing down their country for 2 months a year because they realize the ecological damage that tourists have done. And we should rethink, the military adding more money through their revenues to us, plus their taxes and their grants, can give us solutions to putting air conditioners in schools. We can get more into agriculture, aquaculture, more farming, more subsidizing of our food chain. If we were to increase that base, let's not overlook the industry of the military and include that in increasing our financial base. It's not just tourism. Thank you. Aloha.
Mahalo nui. That concludes our first question in round one, and we move on to round two. The question for round two is this. For years, OHA has raised concerns regarding the mismanagement of Mauna Kea and the disappropriate weighting of observatory development over the protection of this sacred space and the natural and cultural resources and sites the Mauna hosts. Most recently, OHA has filed a lawsuit against the state and UH, alleging ongoing breaches of their fiduciary obligations to properly steward Mauna Kea. Do you support these activities and actions by OHA? Please describe how you perceive OHA's role in regards to the management of Mauna Kea. And starting us off on this round two is Keoni Souza. Keoni, please unmute yourself, and you have 2 minutes on the clock.
Aloha, Kaipo. I do support the activities and actions of OHA, especially with filing the lawsuit against the state and UH for the alleged ongoing breaches of their fiduciary obligations to properly steward Mauna Kea. Oahu should have had an advocate role. OHA should have had an advocate role in any matter concerning the Hawaiian community, the agent's beneficiaries. OHA's role is to immerse itself into the conversation regarding the management of Mauna Kea and fight for the proper care of the Mauna. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui. Up next, we have Trustee Akina. Keliʻi, go ahead and unmute yourself. You have 2 minutes on the clock.
Mahalo. My heart breaks when I see that the Hawaiian community has been torn and divided over the use and management of Mauna Kea. So let me first address the role OHA should be playing amongst our people. OHA needs to bring people together. It needs to bring together voices of Hawaiian community and ho'oponopono to seek common ground. And to do this, OHA must regain trust and restore its reputation by continuing to reform its financial and missional practices. That's why I supported an OHA resolution to meet humanitarian needs of individuals risking health and safety while demonstrating at Mauna Kea. But I insisted that the aid go to any Hawaiians, regardless of which side of the controversy they stood on, against or for the TMT. And I made sure that OHA's funds were monitored and did not go to pay for political activity of any one side. And as a result, I'm pleased with reports that Hawaiians of differing viewpoints all benefited from OHA assistance at Mauna Kea, such as portable toilets, tenting, and trash removal. It's the first step of many more that are needed, but at least it's a step toward OHA bringing Hawaiians together, regardless of what they view. Despite where one stands on the TMT question, we must all be committed to practicing the value of Mālama Aina by ensuring pono management of the Mauna. That's why, as a trustee, I have supported OHA's measures to ensure the preservation and sustainable care of Mauna Kea. Simply put, the state, including OHA, must do more to fulfill its obligations to preserve and protect the environment and cultural heritage of the Mauna. Recommendations of the state auditor must be implemented. Decommissioned telescopes need to be removed. Cultural and religious practices must be ensured, and Hawaiians must have a seat at the table of management. With that said, it's my prayer that Hawaiians can sit down with each other and peacefully discuss the role of science and religion and the sacred on the Mauna. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui, Keliʻi. Up next, we have Larry. Larry, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
I do support OHA efforts to protect the rights of Native Hawaiians. In order to achieve this, OHA needs to be a member in DLNR and part of the decisions on any development on trust lands. Also referred to lands confiscated in 1897, stolen lands. This would require legislation approval. Unless the language of the law is amended to include OHA, I expect OHA trustees to continue to seek remedy. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui. Up next, we have Shane. Shane, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself, and you may share your mana'o.
Thank you, Kaipo. Yes, I support the actions of OHA because the state needs to be held accountable towards the Native Hawaiian stakeholders of ceded lands. Mauna Kea has become a catalyst that showcases how the state has managed all ceded lands to which OHA and the Native Hawaiians have stake in it. The state has failed to account for the interests of the Native Hawaiians on many occasions and view us at times as obstructionary. The countless management plans, including Mauna Kea's, do provide for access and rights for Native Hawaiians, but it is always predetermined on how it plays out for them. The lack of meaningful consultation and the lack of addressing long-standing issues in regards to ceded lands is a testimony to the growing divide between the Native Hawaiians and the state. OHA needs to continue dialogue with the community, the state, and other decision makers who hold leases on Mauna Kea and work towards reconstructing and redeveloping how the Mauna is managed in its entirety, and not just the university's lease portion. Mahalo, Kaipo.
Mahalo nui. Up next, we have Jackie. Jackie, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think that TMT itself is kind of an outdated model. I mean, you can send satellites above the atmosphere and get much more data and be more effective. So I'm really questioning why you want to place this monstrous structure on a sacred mountain. And some people have said to me, maybe it's just an icon of dominance to show that science far outweighs Native or Indigenous people or culture. Now, I do support the lawsuit that OHA is participating in. I find it just a horrible fact that $1 a year is all that the university paid, and none of that revenue or patents from all that research has reached into the Hawaiian community. I think we have to dismantle those telescopes that are not being used. I don't think that the science of just astronomy is what we need. We have dying oceans, we have polluted oceans, we have climate change, we have jobs in all those industries, in all those sciences. Well, in retrospect, I think that the effort to work together is a good thing, and that should continue, and that the Hawaiian voices and our cultural integrity should stay in place, and that the Hawaiians should proceed and be part of the planning process. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui. And closing us out in round 2, we have Kaipo. Kaipo, go ahead and unmute yourself. You have 2 minutes.
Aloha. I do support these recent actions done by OHA. I feel that OHA represents the vast majority of beneficiary interests and must continue to hold the state, University of Hawaii, and Mauna Kea management accountable to prevent any further infringements from being committed. I don't appreciate how Hawaiians are being depicted as anti-science. OHA's role is to make it clear that TMT is first and foremost a public land trust ceded lands issue and OHA needs to promote respect and awareness of Mauna Kea as a sacred monument. This is the biggest aquifer in Hawaii. And this is the birthplace of Haloa. As a trustee, I would propose that OHA facilitate the development of a culturally based community agency that conducts proper stewardship of Mauna Kea by providing resource funding. Aloha.
Mahalo nui, Kaipo, and mahalo to all of our candidates for your mana'o during round 1 and round 2. We're going to go and take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to go into some more questions, including a speed round question that you won't want to miss. Mahalo. See you soon.
Bruh, heard you have a new process of voting this year. I don't vote, bro. Bruh, why not? It's so easy. All you gotta do is register by July 9th, get your ballot in the mail, fill them out, send them back. No lines, no poll station, just you and your kuleana.
The only kuleana I have is become the next big MMA fighter.
You think that's kuleana?
Elena McFarlane?
Vote. It's our kuleana, our right and responsibility. Before you represent Hawaii in the cage, make sure you represent your people with your ballot.
You vote?
Of course I vote. That's the only way I can knock out leaders that don't serve my community. Visit olbr.hawaii.gov and register by July 9th.
Welcome back, everyone. Before our break, we completed rounds 1 and 2 of our candidate forum for our OHA candidates who are running for OHA Trustee at large. Before we move on for our rounds, we're going to do a quick thing that we call a speed round. Now, this is just a question that we throw in to kind of break up the monotony of this forum and for us to all smile and laugh together and enjoy in a simple question. And our speed round question is this: what is your favorite Merry Monarch moment? And now all of our candidates will have 30 seconds to answer this. What is your favorite Merry Monarch moment? And we are going to start off with Keliʻi. Trustee Akina, what is your favorite Merry Monarch moment? 30 seconds.
Well,
Go ahead and
back in the Kani Kapila days, I used to be the halau chanter for a renowned kumuhula. So I always pay attention to the way the chanters exit their halau. It's always the same chant, but it's done differently. For example, it brings back memories to see how different people do that. Mahalo.
Mahalo. Up next, we have Larry. Larry, you have 30 seconds. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
My favorite is the hula dancers and the chants. The chants is amazing. Mahalo.
All right. Mahalo, Larry. Up next, we have Shane. Shane, 30 seconds. What is your favorite Merry Monarch moment?
Yeah, so I truly enjoyed the free night actually on Wednesday, where all the different hula halas from different parts of the world actually come together and they share their interpretation of Hawaii, which is kind of cool. And yeah, the Wednesday night is to me the most awesome. Thank you.
Mahalo nui, Shane. Up next, Jackie. Jackie, 30 seconds on the clock. What is your favorite Merry Monarch moment? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
My favorite Merry Monarch moment is shopping at all the wonderful things. I'm sorry, but that was the most fun I've had in a long time. And I really look forward to that. And I really miss it, not having to have all these wonderful vendors and just have so much stuff to look at. That's my Merry Monarch moment.
I was waiting for that answer. I was waiting for the shopping, for the food, for the clothes. Mahalo, Jackie. All right, Kaipo, 30 seconds on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself. What is your favorite Merry Monarch moment?
My favorite Merry Monarch moment is in 2019. I'm a proud Olapa of Kekaioka and I had the privilege of walking them out on Kahiko night.
Awesome, mahalo. And Keoni Souza, what is your favorite Merry Monarch moment, brother? You have 30 seconds on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thanks for asking, Kaipo. You know, we're fortunate to be able to play for different halaus each year since I was 18 years old at Merry Monarch. What I have to say, one of my most, the most favorite and probably the most emotional moment for me at Merry Monarch was when I got to play for my wife in 2010 as she entered Miss Aloha Hula. And she danced to a song entitled Leipua Keni Keni. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui e Keoni Souza. And mahalo everybody for your answers in what your favorite Merry Monarch moment was. All right, we're going to move on to our round 3. And our question for this round is this. In a recent survey conducted by OHA, the #1 issue amongst respondents was the issue of affordable housing. As trustee of OHA, what would you do to position OHA to address this issue? And starting us off on round 3 is going to be Larry. Larry, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself and the floor is yours.
Hawaii affordable housing has been an unresolved issue for many years. First, to build, you need land. As trustee, my position would be providing funding to build on Hawaiian homelands on all islands, work with state and county to expedite subdividing large parcels of lands into planned developing of 1-acre lots, similar to Big Island subdivisions like Hawaiian Paradise Park, water catchment systems, septic tank, and unimproved side roads, and expedite permitting owner-builder with self-help initiative. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Larry. Up next, we have Shane. Shane, go ahead and unmute yourself. 2 minutes is on the clock for you.
Yeah, mahalo kaipo. Well, there are numerous reasons as to why Native Hawaiians cannot access affordable housing, and some are due to a limited supply of housing, or credit problems, or even the lack of knowing what kinds of services are available to them. In this kind of economic climate, OHA can direct its resources to identify some of the significant barriers to housing, and it could provide more resources to key partners like Hawaii Community Assets or the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, who already have programs that support homeownership or credit counseling, or even funding assistance for down payments on rental or mortgages. Mahalo kaipo.
Mahalo nui, Shane. Up next, we have Jackie. Jackie, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay. Well, housing doesn't equate to immediate ownership options, but rather takes affordable rentals, pathway in a more reasonable rent-to-own reality. Of course, inventory is also a problem, along with financial capacity, which limits direct home ownership. We need to look at our Hawaiian families that need immediate shelter and housing. Families like myself, I'm 47.5% Hawaiian. I need housing. Others like me need housing. It's not just Department of Hawaiian Homes, and I don't agree with that policy. The blood quantum is a tribal policy. But I sit on a nonprofit board, the Hawaiian Development Community Board, and we just recently completed the last phase of Nanakuli Village Center. Under our executive director, Kali Watson, in 2013, Halimakana o Nanakuli affordable renting housing complex was completed with 48 units, taking homeless families off the street, allowing a grandmother raising her 5 grandkids housing. And then when the partnership with Federal Agency Housing, Urban Development, state and federal grants and bonds, selling tax credit for $6 million to Morgan Stanley, and done in partnership on Hawaiian Homelands. After we did all of that, we also put a multi-purpose community center. And just last month, we finished the community medical and commercial retail center, which recently opened. The model is OHA can buy the land, put it in trust like Hawaiian Homes. We partner together, build affordable rentals to housing ownership. And this is a model that can be used for all Hawaiians or Native Hawaiians or Hawaiian nationals. Thank you.
Mahalo nui, Jackie. Up next, we have Kaipo. Kaipo, go ahead and unmute yourself. 2 minutes is on the clock for you.
It has been proposed by others for the state to rezone ag lands into affordable housing developments. I disagree with this proposal because it does not address key concerns for the Hawaiian people and does not include the Department of Hawaiian Homeland waitlist issue. As trustee, I will advocate for the use of beneficiary assets such as land and capital to build infrastructure and affordable homes for Native Hawaiians of all blood quantum. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui. Up next, we have Keoni Souza. Keoni, go ahead and unmute yourself. 2 minutes is on the clock for you.
Thank you, Kaipo. You know, as a licensed real estate agent, I'm immersed daily in the housing market and seeing how difficult it is for individuals and families to purchase homes. I'm fortunate to utilize my skill set in this area to assist families in the home buying process so they can secure a piece of real estate in Hawaii and start to build wealth. I understand through my dealings with clients the need for a place to call home. I'm well versed in this area, and this informs my perspectives on the issue of affordable housing. I have an issue with the term affordable housing because there are too many strings attached to the words, and oftentimes affordable housing is, well, not really true to its word in being affordable when implemented. As such, we need to find an alternative means of typical affordable housing solutions and focus on creative, inexpensive housing throughout our archipelago, not just on Oahu. I will, number one, position OHA to collaborate with the building trades, my friends, and nonprofits to create inexpensive housing and solutions. Number two, work with DHHL closely to formulate ways in which we can provide housing solutions to our beneficiaries in a timely manner. And three, educate the Hawaiian community on the home buying process. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui e Keoni. Up next, we have Keliʻi. Keliʻi, go ahead and take yourself off mute. You have 2 minutes on the clock.
Mahalo. Before I was elected trustee at large in 2016, OHA had been spending millions of dollars every year on political agendas. But in a survey commissioned by OHA, it was discovered that the majority of Hawaiians disagreed with OHA's focus. Instead, Hawaiians felt that OHA should focus on bread and butter issues such as housing, jobs, education, and healthcare. Now with the coronavirus, these pressing needs have only intensified, and countless Hawaiians are struggling with homelessness and the unaffordable ability to buy homes. That's why I've pushed OHA to focus on meeting basic needs rather than on pursuing controversial political agendas. As a trustee, I initiated a 3-point plan to develop the land and resources of OHA's trust fund to build wealth so it can meet the housing needs of Hawaiians. First, protect the trust through audits and sound fiscal policies. Secondly, grow the trust by developing the financial potential of Kaka'ako Makai and other commercial properties. And third, use the trust for real needs of OHA beneficiaries, such as housing, especially those in poverty. Now, when it comes to housing, OHA needs to exercise more kuleana with the Hawaiian homelands. There are currently more than 27,000 applicants on the Hawaiian homelands waiting list, which is a tragic shame. And thousands have died waiting on the list. DHHL is land rich, but cash poor. OHA has the ability to become cash rich and build the resources needed for infrastructure and housing on Hawaiian homelands. There are countless solutions to housing using the Hawaiian homelands and OHA's commercial properties, partnering with developers and the elite trusts, using innovative models such as tiny homes, rental apartments, and other creative options. I'll continue to push OHA to make housing and basic needs a focus of what OHA provides for the people. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui. And that concludes our round 3. We are now going into our round 4, and this is our new question. With Native Hawaiians overrepresented at every stage of the law enforcement and criminal justice process, OHA has taken a leading role in advocating for criminal justice reform policies. What are some ways that you feel the criminal justice system should be changed to reduce its impact on the Native Hawaiian community? And starting us off on this round, we have Shane. Shane, go ahead and unmute yourself. You have 2 minutes on the clock.
Yeah, mahalo Kaipo. So there are many reasons that contribute to the large number of Native Hawaiians entering the criminal justice system. Yet the lack of cultural sufficient programs and effective services to prepare prisoners for reintegration have led to recidivism and a high rate of Native Hawaiians returning to prison, especially for those that are housed in out-of-state facilities due to Hawaii's overcrowded prison population. Also, these programs and services tend to be understaffed and sometimes not available, which prevents inmates from being eligible for the earliest possible release date. And in most cases, prisoners are released without completing the programs. Access to these programs and services should be readily available for all prisoners to fully complete them prior to their release date. OHA needs to collaborate with the state to rethink how we house our inmates and support rehabilitation with the priority to eliminate recidivism. Mahalo Kaipo.
Mahalo nui. Up next, we have Jackie. Jackie, you have 2 minutes for your mana'o. Go ahead and unmute yourself and the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, recently I found out that OHA appointed a representative to the Correctional Oversight Commission, which is a step in the right direction. You know, the prison industry is a very big industry, and we are shipping our prisoners off island to Arizona. We're paying much too much now. The price of shipping them has gone up. And then we have a judiciary system that is based on, you know, sort of probably more of a racist-based system because it comes from the United States and the American courts. And that was modeled after slavery. The police were formed to bring slaves back. And then we have, and I agree with many other candidates, that we don't have a sufficient rehab system, you know, and that is one of our major problems because we're sending these offenders right back into the circle they came from. And so they can be rehabbed and they go right back into the circle, family or friends, and they reoffend again. And the other program that I'd like us to see is to work with juveniles and work with middle schools and set up an educational after-school program, because that's probably where some of these problems start. We have children in foster care that age out of foster care. That's another area that we could spend some money, in bringing down the rates of offenders and juvenile offenders. I think OHA is starting in the right pathway, and I'd like to see more of it done, especially in rehabilitation. Thank you.
Mahalo nui, Jackie. Up next, we have Kaipo. Kaipo, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
Well, I feel that the criminal justice system needs to implement more community organizations that develop programs which increase rehabilitation efforts and adopt cultural programs built on Hawaiian theories of knowledge. OHA could also assist the district attorneys to monitor and guard against racial biases when decided to pursue criminal charges. Aloha.
Mahalo nui e Kaipo. Up next, we have Keoni. Keoni, go ahead and unmute yourself. You have 2 minutes, and the floor is yours.
Mahalo Kaipo. The reality of the situation is that Native Hawaiians are overrepresented in the criminal justice system due to unfair treatment. OHA's 2010 report titled "The Disparate Treatment of Native Hawaiians in the Criminal Justice System" showed that Native Hawaiians were affected at each stage of the criminal justice process, beginning with the arrest, which at the time the report asserted that data from Hawaii's Attorney General showed that Native Hawaiians are arrested at a greater frequency than Hawaii's other ethnic groups, often second to whites in specific offense categories. As a result of the report, the Native Hawaiian Justice Task Force was born. 10 years later, the reality has not changed. The criminal justice system should not be changed per se, but the entities involved in the process should implement measures to reduce the impact of the system on Native Hawaiians. For instance, our police departments could implement implicit bias training for officers. Moreover, number one, OHA should seek a partnership with the Office of the Public Defender to create a preventative education program for Native Hawaiians. Two, OHA should also nurture its relationship with the Hawaii Correctional System Oversight Commission and forge a strong connection with the Hawaii Youth Correctional Facility and all the prisons here locally to address the real problems that are occurring within the system. OHA can create programs to support Hawaiians in other ways to keep them on the productive path so that they can stay far removed from the criminal justice system as well. OHA needs to heavily invest in education, scholarships, home ownership programs, and wellness programs to provide Hawaiians with the resources to thrive in Hawaii. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui e Keoni. Up next, we have Keliʻi. Keliʻi, go ahead and unmute yourself. You have 2 minutes on the clock.
Mahalo. Hawaii has long been in need of criminal justice reform, and many basic reform measures will help both Native Hawaiians and the whole population. One measure that would help is reform of the state civil asset forfeiture laws. At present, no conviction is required for police to seize property. This is devastating to many Native Hawaiian families when one member is arrested. At minimum, it should be reformed. And there are many other actions the state can take to improve Hawaii's criminal justice system. These will help Hawaiians. First, a clean slate initiative, which would make it easier for nonviolent offenders who have been rehabilitated to get their records expunged. Secondly, more culturally sensitive alternatives to rehabilitation rather than just putting people in prison. Third, improved vocational training that can help ex-offenders re-enter the job market. And fourth, providing incentives to employers which will give Hawaiians who are ex-offenders a job. But in conclusion, I have to say, the best solution is prevention. And that means building strong ohana so Hawaiians don't end up in the criminal justice system. In my early career as a kahu, I worked with youth and families on the Waianae-Nanakuli coast and across the state to empower them through community programs such as Parent Project, which equips parents to intervene successfully in the risky behaviors of their children. I have personally mentored and seen at-risk Hawaiian youth overcome family, educational, and economic barriers to achieve success in life. It's empowering to see them embrace Hawaiian values that I have learned from my kupuna and taught to my children, like kulia ika nu'u, strive to achieve the highest, and mai maka'u ika hana, maka'u ika molova, don't fear work, fear laziness. Our values taught in the family are the key to preventing getting into the criminal justice system. That's key.
Mahalo nui loa. And closing us out in this question, we have Larry. Larry, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
This question is not clear of Native Hawaiians being overrepresented in law enforcement or criminal justice process, nor of OHA's topics to reform criminal justice policies. Here's my manao in order to properly answer this question. I would need more information on overrepresented, in what area and what topics of the present policies the present OHA trustees felt it's necessary to advocate. However, I would like to see Native Hawaiian prisoners be kept in Hawaii's prison system. Media had reported state of Hawaii spends over $90,000 per prisoner per year. Hawaii pays another state, reducing our revenues and increasing another state's revenues. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui. And we are going to ask one more question before we cut to break, and this begins our round 5. The question for round 5 is this. In the last 12 months, we have seen large community demonstrations to oppose projects on Mauna Kea, in Kahuku, and in Waimanalo. Hundreds of people have been arrested. Why do you think this has occurred, and what can OHA do to potentially remedy these issues? Starting us off on this question is Jackie. Jackie, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay. Well, there are these gaps or black holes that Hawaiians are forced to fit into. It leaves few options for Hawaiians and others, but to physically show a force of strength by demonstrating, because no other course offers an effective media grabbing attention venue. The standing plantation-based oppression colonizer has made the rules, and it favors capitalistic investments and not community engagement. If we can start to identify these gaps, the responsibility, and measure them, we can probably build a bridge of power. One of those gaps was Kaho'olawe, and we stopped the bombing. It was too late, and then the cleanup itself was underfunded. That gap was a lawsuit by my dear cousin, George Jared Helm. We have to reconstruct the foundations of these gaps caused by colonization movements against the Hawaiian people into the shared bridge of power. These gaps constantly appear because the Hawaiian leadership is stifled under the colonized plantations, systematically eradicating the power of Hawaiian people. When the Hawaiians say no, we have to protest, re-question, and examine for our motives, be reminded how illegal our activity is, but then under political grace, such as Mauna Kea, allowed us to continue and be pleased while protesting. That was a powerful moment, and it caught the TMT builders and the government supporters by total surprise. I'm grateful that no violent confrontations took place. OHA should continue to fund and ensure safety, health, and any efforts to bring stability to any issue of confrontational efforts. OHA needs to also go into the community and facilitate discussions around any of these kinds of issues. Thank you.
Mahalo nui, Jackie. Up next, we have Kaipo. Kaipo, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
This has occurred due to the injustices of the people of Hawaii has faced for 127 years. The same old political kickbacks, backroom dealings, and fast tracking continue to occur on a daily basis. The state has remained a mere executive council of oligarchy, set up without the approval of the people, claiming management over land they do not have clear, quiet title to. As a trustee, I will continue to encourage our people to take action and support them in that action. Onipa'a no Waimanalo, kukia I Kahuku, kukia I Mauna. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui e Kaipo. Up next, we have Keoni Souza. Keoni, go ahead and unmute yourself. You have 2 minutes on the clock, and you may begin.
Mahalo Kaipo. You know, Hawaiians and non-Hawaiian community members want to be heard. This is why we see frequent and mass protesting and community demonstrations. We have seen so many community engagement in the past 12 months, and it is refreshing to witness the uprising of our people and culture. Hawaiians have been marginalized for decades, and our people are now being heard. OHA can remedy these issues by, number 1, facilitating peaceful and safe protest opportunities. Number 2, coming to the table with various leaders who are actively immersed in their respective communities. And 3, heavily increasing the number of town hall and community meetings throughout our state. The Hawaiian community wants to be heard, and OHA needs to listen and be a catalyst to forge meaningful change within our communities after we listen to the issues, synthesize the information, and take action to remedy the problems. Also, in executing new and improved communication efforts, OHA needs to outline a specific course of action for bold community engagement plan that focuses on one main item, steps that we will take to listen to the Hawaiian community. OHA needs to start to identify as the repository of community issues and will subsequently track its progress in resolving community concerns. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui e Keoni. Up next, we have Trustee Akina. Keliʻi, go ahead and unmute yourself. You have 2 minutes on the clock, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's absolutely heartbreaking to see the Hawaiian community and the public torn and divided over many controversial issues. These include the Kahuku wind farms, Waimanalo land use, and the management of Mauna Kea. So let me first address the role OHA should be playing amongst our people. OHA needs to bring together the voices of the Hawaiian community itself and the public to ho'oponopono and seek common ground. But to do this, OHA must regain trust and restore its reputation. I've worked hard to get to that goal. For many of these issues, such as the 30-meter telescope, and I've talked to so many on both sides, there are underlying needs and grievances that have not been addressed. This includes the economic conditions of Native Hawaiians, poverty, homelessness, and incarceration. It also includes concerns over justice, such as the overthrow of sovereignty and disenfranchisement. Without addressing these, there is little hope for unity on the level of modern-day developments, such as a 30-meter telescope or windmills. OHA needs to play a major role in which stakeholders are allowed to be at the table from the very beginning of projects. OHA needs to create a bridge between all people where respect and mutual trust can be developed. One important place to start is to fulfill an agreement that already is recognized by Hawaiians, the state government, and the federal government, but it remains an unfulfilled promise. I'm talking about providing Hawaiians with the 20% of the public lands trust funds that they deserve. This is actually not controversial and should be done as a simple matter of law and justice. It will go a long way in terms of empowering Hawaiians with the economic capacity to rise above the conditions and the root causes of conflicts. We need to work together. My philosophy is e hana kako. Let's all work together. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui e Keliʻi. Up next, we have Larry. Larry, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
Mahalo. Community demonstrations occurred because for far too long, the state has turned a deaf ear and a blind eye to Native Hawaiians of these islands. Minimizing their rights and cultural practices witnesses abuse of developments on their stolen lands. Native Hawaiian kupunas was arrested protecting their place of worship is heavily wrong. Governor Ige's decision to arrest Native Hawaiians and order to tear down cultural educational center was seen as a racist decision. The demonstration on the Mauna as peaceful and in kapu aloha. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui. And rounding us out on this round, we have Shane. Shane, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, mahalo Kaipo. So generally, I believe people are not against the advancement of technology and science or renewable energy resources and other projects that provide broad benefits to Hawaii at reasonable costs. However, misinformation, the lack of transparency, and rushing through processes creates these types of divides. When the community is not afforded the opportunity to engage with project leaders, the decision makers, and when possible, prior to government approvals, the divides between them increases and cause frustrations that lead to protests and litigations that amount to unwanted costs to taxpayers. OHA can assist by working with decision makers and project managers to broaden the project scope and approval processes to include community in the initial planning phases. This would allow for the developer and the community to address concerns early on and minimize the divides as decision makers and leaders engage the community in good faith to consider the true impacts of projects on neighborhoods, residents, schools, traffic, and the overall quality of life. Mahalo Kaipo.
Mahalo nui. And that concludes this round. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will have our last round of questions, including our final statements from all of our candidates. So don't go anywhere. Aloha.
COVID-19 has taught us what is really essential in our lives. Toilet paper? Yep, that's essential. An affordable place to live? That's essential. Steady jobs are essential. How do we get those things? By voting Pono leaders into office who stand up for what's important. This year, Hawaii will shift to an all mail-in voting process. Starting July 21st, registered voters should watch for their ballots in the mail. Vote. It's essential.
Heard you have a new process of voting this year. I don't vote, bro. It's so easy. All you gotta do is register by July 9th, get your ballot in the mail, fill them out, send them back. No lines, no post stations, just you and your kuleana.
The only kuleana I have is become the next big MMA fight.
You think that's kuleana? Vote. It's our kuleana, our right and responsibility. Before you represent Hawaii in the cage, make sure you represent your people with your ballot.
And if you missed registration at olvr.hawaii.gov for the primary elections, you can still visit elections.hawaii.gov to look at the voter poll stations, and you can still do same-day voter registration. All right, so make sure you visit elections.hawaii.gov if you did not register by July 9th. Or you can go to olvr.hawaii.gov and register for your mail-in ballot for the general elections. All right, we are going on to our next round of questions, and our question is this. As a result of the COVID crisis, we have seen many communities experience food insecurity through Hawaii. Increasing food production has long been a demand of many Native Hawaiian and non-Hawaiian community leaders. How can OHA play a role in responding to this demand? And up first, we have Kaipo. Kaipo, go ahead and unmute yourself, and you have 2 minutes on the clock.
Mahalo. Hawaii is too dependent on imports and tourism. During this COVID pandemic, we went from having the lowest unemployment rate in the United States to the second highest. We also currently import 85 to 90% of our food. That makes us especially vulnerable in the event of a natural disaster. We need to think about what we can do as far as growing and manufacturing locally. The Native Hawaiian community can help achieve, in collaboration with OHA, this vision by being active participants in the restructure of our economic focus through food sovereignty. During Kingdom times, Hawaii was one of the most technological advanced societies. There's no reason we cannot be that innovative again. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui e Kaipo. Up next, we have Keoni Souza. Keoni, go ahead and unmute yourself. You have 2 minutes on the clock to answer this question.
Mahalo Kaipo. Increasing food production can be accomplished at the grassroots level in our communities. OHA can, number one, provide resources to implement and or increase the number of community gardens throughout the islands in order to encourage growing our own food, especially in urban areas such as Kawaauhau. Number two, OHA can increase education in growing food and perhaps even educating our youngsters on how to fish. And three, work with the private sectors and food production industries in order to identify how we can work together to bring awareness to our communities and subsequently grow more food, especially healthy food to reduce obesity, diabetes, and heart disease, and increase wellness for our vulnerable Hawaiian population for prevention and to help those already dealing with these health issues. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui e Keoni. Up next, we have Keliʻi. Keliʻi, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead.
Mahalo. Food security and sustainability are a complex issue requiring a massive effort by the state of Hawaii. That's why the current state administration set a goal of doubling the food supply within 3 years. The reality is that the state has failed to reach its goal, and major aspects of agriculture have actually declined over the past 7 years. With the closure of Maui cane and sugar, Hawaii's last major plantation, more than 50% of all Hawaii's agriculturally zoned land lies fallow with no productivity whatsoever. Now, several factors impact Hawaii's ability to be agriculturally self-sufficient. One is federal and state government regulations that are overly burdensome on our local farmers. In my policy work, I'm trying to fight these regulations so that Hawaiian farmers and small farmers are not overburdened. Of the 7,000 farms in Hawaii, 90% are under 50 acres. Hawaiian farming is not big business, and it's not capable of absorbing the cost of government regulation. One of the keys to food sustainability is actually producing more than we need and exporting it to the rest of the world. OHA can do a lot to help Hawaiian farmers and other small farmers market their products as the freshest, most flavorful produce on the planet. One government regulation that can be modified to help our farmers is the Jones Act, which reduces the number of ships leaving Hawaii with exports. More ships will mean lower costs for our local farmers to export their goods. Ultimately, OHA can play a major role in educating our keiki and public on the Hawaiian culture of self-sustainable agriculture that's aina sensitive. Across the islands, I visited and made friends with many local farmers. They've taught me a lot about caring for the land and living off of it. And this has impacted my ohana. My wife and I now have a small farm and are practicing our own regenerative agriculture. As we do this, it's good for Hawaii, good for the economy, and good for our soul.
All right, mahalo nui e Keliʻi. Up next, we have Larry. Larry, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
Right. OHA needs land zone agriculture to secure food production. Seek the inventory of vacant seeded lands, zone, ag, and or partner with large landowner such as Bishop Estate. In turn, provide business opportunities for Native Hawaiians, helps reliance on importing all of our food supplies. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui, Larry. Up next, we have Shane. Shane, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead when you're ready. Unmute yourself.
Mahalo, Kaipo. So yeah, being raised in a farming and fishing community in South Kona, there are numerous things that OHA should consider in order to participate in responding to the food production industry in Hawaii. Hawaii is not new to food production. In fact, it continues to have industries such as kalo, ulu, aquacultures, coffee and fruit orchards, cattle and piggeries, just to name a few. Hawaii has definitely had success in food production. However, there were monocropping industries such as sugar and pineapple that led Hawaii's economy and lasted over a century, but ended up with negative impacts to our water and mineral resources and devastated communities economically. And some of these communities are still struggling to recover today. Back in 2010, I spent some time advocating at the state capitol to streamline an arduous process and minimize the cost of government permitting processes in regards to reviving fish ponds in Hawaii. My grandfather and his ohana were one of the last stewards at Kaloko Fish Pond in Kona, just before it was abandoned. And decades later, the community saved it from being filled in for resort development. I continue its legacy to support and assist efforts to restore and reuse Kaloko, but we are faced with challenges from surrounding developments and sewage treatment issues that impact the quality of water needed to raise food. Therefore, OHA's leadership needs to direct its resources, such as its land holdings, funding, and seeking out avenues for exportation and distribution between the islands and out-of-state markets. These are just some of the few things that need to be considered. Mahalo, Kaipo.
Mahalo nui, Shane. And lastly on this round, we have Jackie. Jackie, go ahead and unmute yourself. You have 2 minutes on the clock.
Well, you know, I have tried my hand at farming. I was writing a grant. I grew the Tongan hibiscus, and it has 90% protein. And 10 years ago, I was able to raise $20,000 and take it out into the Hawaiian community and give them plantings and cuttings and a recipe book. And more of this type of food products needs to be grown. Another area that is in demand is the breadfruit, the ulu. I think about 10 years ago, about $100,000 grant was given to Mililani Farms, and they planted 10 acres of breadfruit. There's a market the global market for non-GMO products. There's a global market for gluten-free products. there's a lot of possibilities. That land up there in Maui that was abandoned, you know, it could be turned into a breadfruit farm. It could be turned into this peli plant that I was growing, the hibiscus, Tongan hibiscus. And of course, we have to be able to control the diseases, because, you know, our papayas, our avocados, those are really popular products that, you know, go out of state. We have, way back in World War II, they had the victory gardens, and that's the same concept as small gardens, but now we have to take it to the aquaponic approach, so that people in urban settings can grow their own food. I think there's a lot of things that OHA can put their money in, and also provide expertise and training for our Hawaiian community to be more food sufficient. Thank you.
Mahalo nui. And here is our last question before we go on to our closing statements. And our question is this: what are some of the issues of greatest concern facing the Native Hawaiian community on neighbor islands today? And how do you feel that the state of Hawaii or OHA can better address them? To start us off on this question, we have Keoni Souza. Keoni, go ahead and unmute yourself. You have 2 minutes on the clock.
Thank you, Kaipo. Generally, on the neighbor islands, here are a few of the issues facing the Native Hawaiian communities. On Mauna Kea, there's a lack of jobs and a deer problem because of the lack of water and food in their usual habitat has driven deer into the fields for nourishment at the farmer's expense. On Maui, we need to focus on jobs and education. On Kauai, we need to focus on flood recovery and caring for our salt ponds. On Hawaii Island, there is a rampant and widespread drug addiction and lack of housing. However, the most pressing issue facing the Hawaiian community and neighbor island community is the missing children on Hawaii Island and sex trafficking. We need more vigilance in our communities. We need to identify the real problem and determine how we can best prevent any more of these situations from occurring. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui e Keoni. Up next, we have Keliʻi. Keliʻi, go ahead and unmute yourself. You have 2 minutes on the clock for this question.
Mahalo. As I've traveled and visited with beneficiaries across the islands, I've been impressed by their aloha spirit, but troubled by the challenges they face. Nearly every economic and social issue which Hawaiians struggle with on Oahu is intensified on the neighbor islands. This includes cost of living, housing, homelessness, medical care, mental health, educational opportunity, and notably the lack of well-paying jobs. As a result, our neighbor island Hawaiians have experienced inordinate numbers of their young people leaving their homes for Oahu and the mainland. Now, this strikes at the fabric of ohana and community. One challenge, especially for small businesses, is the isolation and small population. And now in the midst of the coronavirus crisis, the loss of the tourist market has terribly impacted local Hawaiian businesses. One Hawaiian business owner remarked to me that at least on Oahu, there's a larger market to sell products to, but without a ferry system between the islands, finding new markets for him is unaffordable from his island. Now, don't get me wrong. There are wonderful examples of neighbor islanders leading progress in their communities, especially with charter schools and agricultural projects. I've been involved in developing housing initiatives and providing meals to those who are shut in during the present crisis. But so much more can be done, and OHA can lead the way, especially with economic development on each island. We need to provide financial resources and training opportunities for neighbor island Hawaiian businesses to flourish and transform their economy. This must include diversification away from tourism and a major emphasis on sustainable agriculture, as well as new businesses such as high tech. OHA needs to have an economic task force on each island to kickstart growth and the empowerment of Native Hawaiian businesses. As they thrive, so will their home islands. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui e Keliʻi. Up next, we have Larry. Larry, I believe you were cut off, so I'm going to read this question to you one more time, and then you're going to have 2 minutes to respond to it. The question right now is, what are some of the issues of greatest concern facing the Native Hawaiian community on neighbor islands today? How do you feel that the state of Hawaii or OHA can better address them? All right, Larry, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
First of all, protecting our family kuleana lands, our rights to our natural resources, right of representation, right to worship, and right of redress, the right to exonerate our queen, Liliuokalani. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui, Larry. Up next, we have Shane. Shane, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself and you may share your mana'o.
Thanks, Kaipo. So the local economy is the most pressing issue on all islands. More important on the neighbor islands, as referred to earlier, that it's a little bit more of an extra struggle in neighbor islands. The increasing rate and the cost of living and access to or maintaining housing forces many Native Hawaiians to work multiple low-paying jobs. We need to flip the status quo and focus on rebuilding a new, sustainable, and resilient economy that offers high-paying jobs filled with qualified local industry professionals. OHA can deploy its resources to aim toward building and improving local talent and skills that will lift the community and allow for everyone to thrive. A strong economy means there is a reasonable cost of living, an abundance of well-paying jobs, and available affordable housing, to which we can now focus less on surviving and more on thriving. Ola Kanaka, Ola Hawaii. If Hawaiians thrive, Hawaii will thrive. Mahalo, Kaipo.
Mahalo nui, Shane. Up next, we have Jackie. Jackie, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself and the floor is yours. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Jackie.
Yes, we can address all of these problems, the economics, social, and political problems. There's the funding and revenue stream. Most of these neighbor islands have county taxes. They don't get a large share of tourist tax. But one of the things that we can do, which might work for them in order to just organize themselves, is to look how on Oahu we have the neighborhood boards. Now, I worked with the West Pacific Fisheries, and we did this Ahu Puao Council called Ahu Moku, where it really looked into the neighbor islands, and we started with the fishermen. But what we need, I think, is to have a communication venue available for community so that they can work more efficiently with government. So the neighborhood boards, they have the police department, the fire department, Department of Transportation, all the government reps come to the meetings. And I think that the neighbor islands could really benefit from some kind of model where they have more interaction with all of these agencies and the community and create a unified voice. And OHA could do that. OHA could take up where the Ahu Moku, the Ahu Pua'a model, which is still sitting in the legislature and was developed by West Pacific Fisheries. They could take up that model into community in order to have community empowered and have a stronger presence and a stronger voice and a more defined relationship within the community to all the agencies and to the representatives that are out there in the neighborhood and mostly rural areas of the neighbor islands. Thank you.
Mahalo nui, Jackie. And closing us out on this question, we have Kaipo. Kaipo, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself and the floor is yours.
Mahalo. One of the biggest issues facing the Native Hawaiian communities on neighbor islands today is economics. Native Hawaiian land assets and its natural resources are constantly being targeted and assaulted by state agencies who operate with revenues withheld from Native Hawaiians and allow foreign corporations to continuously dishonor state public trust laws. Another issue Native Hawaiians face is self-governance. There is not a legal basis for denying our claim to 100% of the public land trust, let alone the 20% that the state has declared itself responsible for. The first order of business is for OHA to start receiving those 20% of the public land trust revenues. In addition to that, 2012 was the first year that all state agencies that create revenue from ceded lands reported their revenue. OHA had to do its own research and audit to discover that the revenue gained by the state for public land trust was twice the amount reported. The state needs to conduct an audit to determine what is truly owed to the Native Hawaiian people. This problematic behavior of underreporting and attempting to withhold resources from Native Hawaiians continues the cycle of incompetence. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui. All right, at this time, we're going to give all of the candidates a chance to give their closing statement. We are setting our clock to 1 minute. And starting us off in our closing statements is Keliʻi Akina. Keliʻi, you have 1 minute on the clock. Go ahead when you're ready.
Mahalo. I want to say thank you for all the people who are watching tonight. And I thank OHA for putting on tonight's program. Great job. Mahalo to my fellow candidates. I wish you the best, and I hope that many of you become trustees. I'm very impressed with you. And if I can do anything for you, let me know. I want to return to office in 2020 because I have to finish the work of reforming OHA that I began. There's much left to be done. And then we need to protect the trust, build the trust, and grow the trust so that all Hawaiians have housing, jobs, education, and healthcare. But protecting the trust is my forte. And so I ask you, vote Akina because OHA needs a watchdog. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui e Keliʻi. Up next, we have Larry. Larry, you have 1 minute on the clock. Go ahead and unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
In closing, I'll leave you with a brief background of who I am. Today, I'm a retired Army Sergeant veteran. As any soldier, we are trained to support, protect, and defend. I was sent to Iraq to protect people of another race, of another country at war. As a ranking soldier, lives depend on proper planning, secure and to protect lives. Not knowing if I was to return home, I did, and now, elected as your next OHA Trustee at Large, I am committed to listen, support, secure, protect, and defend my fellow Native Hawaiians. You're the beneficiaries like me, whose ancestors have long gone and never got to witness the rise of their Mopunas, indigenous people, inheritors of these islands. Allow me this time to represent us. Mahalo. Mahalo to all the candidates. Aloha.
All right, mahalo e Larry. Up next, we have Shane. Shane, you have 1 minute for your closing statement. Go ahead.
Yep, mahalo Kaipo and to OHA for allowing me this time to share my perspectives to everyone. We are faced with many challenges as we redefine our community in this new normal. And I'm that candidate that has already committed to building this agency through its thick and thin times without using tactics to tear down what rightfully belongs to Native Hawaiians. I'm committed to restoring trust between OHA and its beneficiaries and build stakeholders that support its mission and objectives. It's time for a change in leadership, and to do that, I need your vote. Ola Kanaka, Ola Hawaii. When Hawaiians thrive, Hawaii will thrive. Vote Shane Akoni Palacat-Nelsen. Mahalo and aloha.
Mahalo nui e Shane. Up next, we have Jackie. Jackie, you have 1 minute for your closing statements, and the clock is reset, so go ahead and unmute yourself.
All right, I'm going to speak because of many voices. I find Trustee Akina Heva in reclassifying who he serves. He doesn't serve the Hawaiian people anymore. He serves everyone, which is counter to what the Office of Hawaiian Affairs stands for. It's legal, but during the Hawaiian Kingdom Day, Hawaiian nationals of every ethnicity could vote. Now we're classifying American citizens living in Hawaii as Hawaiians. Non-Hawaiians, vote your conscience. I leave you with this. Hapai au, hapai o iluna kako. I lift, you lift, together we rise. Vote for Jackie Burke for OHA Trustee at Large. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui, Jackie. Up next, we have Kaipo. Kaipo, you have 1 minute on the clock for your closing statements. Go ahead and unmute yourself when you're ready.
Mahalo. Mahalo, fellow candidates. Mahalo ke akua no ke iamanawa. Mahalo e kalahui. Eia, ke kahe au. No ka koko hopono. No ka aina. No ka lahui. No ka lehulehu. He mahi aikalo. Like haloa. O ka mauna ke kahua. Mai poina ko mākou kuleana. O Hawaii no ko kākou kuleana. Mahalo, ke akua puno, ko hopono. Kaipo Hanakahi, ke Kea. Ke aloha aina kākou. Aloha.
Mahalo no e Kaipo. And closing us out with our final statement is Keoni Souza. Keoni, go ahead and unmute yourself, and you have 1 minute on the clock.
Mahalo Kaipo, Mika, everyone at OEV TV and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs for hosting this forum, providing us with a platform to connect with the people of Hawaii. Let me tell you this one thing. We don't need a watchdog or disciplinarian. What we need is new blood to inspire true leadership. We must always go back to our roots and remember where we came from. As a Native Hawaiian musician, I perpetuate a history held sacred to our kupuna, storytelling. To our mele and oli, we passed on cultural knowledge and keep the traditions of our people alive today. My experience as an entertainer has taken me all across Hawaii, from Hilo to Hanalei, where I spent time with and gotten to know the people in our communities that I look to now to represent as OHA Trustee. I'm ready to be the voice for our people. When Hawaiians thrive, Hawaii thrives. No Hawaiian left behind. I would be honored to have your vote. I leave you with this. From Hilo to Hanalei, you all have a say. Vote Souza for OHA today. Aloha.
Mahalo nui e Keoni Souza. And mahalo nui to all of our OHA candidates for taking the time to be here with us. If you guys did not get a chance to see our previous OHA forums, all of our forums are still posted on Facebook. They were cross-shared on various community sites. But if you want to go to OHA's Facebook or Kawaauhau's Facebook, you can still see our first forum, which we talk stories with our OHA candidates from representing the Molokaʻi and Lanai district, as well as Kauai and Niʻihau. Last week, you can find us talking stories with our Hawaii Island trustee candidates. And of course, we have our trustee candidates at large that we spoke with today. As well as our guest today, Mahealani Mika Hirao Salam. Mahalo nui everybody for watching. Make sure that if you have not registered to vote, make sure that you go out and vote. If you didn't register before July 9th for your mail-in ballots, you can still visit elections.hawaii.gov. Once again, that's elections.hawaii.gov. And you can still do same-day voter registration at whatever walk-up booth you find on that website. You can also go to olvr.hawaii.gov to register for the general elections to have your ballots mailed to you. So on behalf of OHA and OEV TV, I want to send a special mahalo to OEV TV for all of their setups and for making this look amazing. Mahalo nui for all of you guys for tuning in. I hope you guys get out and I hope you guys go and vote. Mahalo nui.